Pope represents the voice of God in this world. The Pope does have authority to make certain decisions in the Church, and Catholics believe that the Pope was given this authority by Christ. For that reason, Popes' shares and statements always receive great attention from Christians. Recently, Pope Francis revealed horrifying truths about the Antichrist that shocked the whole world. It is very possible that the Antichrist we often talk about has not just appeared in theory, but he is actually walking among us, seeking to build trust with humans and then destroy us when we least expected it. I invite you to watch until the end of this video to see what secret will be revealed. Antichrist May in Vatican. Pope Francis warned top Vatican officials against the temptation of believing the Catholic Church is no longer in need of conversion, and said that creating a pure church, only for the pure, would be a return to heresy. The worst thing that could happen to us is to think that we are no longer in need of conversion, either as individuals or as a community, said Francis. Where the gospel is concerned, we are always like children needing to learn. The illusion that we have learned everything makes us fall into spiritual pride. In his annual pre-Christmas address to the Roman Curia, the Vatican's central bureaucracy, the Pope recalled the Second Vatican Council, saying that the conversion of the Church sparked by the Council over 60 years ago must continue to preach the gospel more fully and to make it relevant, living, and effective in our time. Our current reflection on the Church's synodality is the fruit of our conviction that the process of understanding Christ's message never ends, but constantly challenges us, said the Pope. For Francis, the opposite of conversion is immobility, which he said is the secret belief that we have nothing else to learn from the gospel. This is the error of trying to crystallize the message of Jesus in a single, perennially valid form, he warned. Instead, its form must be capable of constantly changing, so that its substance can remain constantly the same. True heresy consists not only in preaching another gospel, as St. Paul told us, but also in ceasing to translate its message into today's languages and ways of thinking, which is precisely what the Apostle of the Gentiles did. To preserve means to keep alive and not to imprison the message of Christ, he added. In the previous, Francis has used the annual address to the Curia to chide Vatican officials for obstinacy towards his reform efforts or for possessing certain spiritual diseases that hamper their work. This address was more conciliatory than past remarks. If there are times when I say things that might sound harsh and pointed, it is not because I don't believe in the value of kindness and persuasion, the Pope acknowledged. Rather, it is because it is good to keep our caresses for the weary and the oppressed, and to have the courage to afflict the comfortable. In examining the Church's need for ongoing conversion, the Pope told the heads of Vatican offices that often we put too much trust in ourselves, our strategies, and our programs, and that many of the Church's failings come from not putting Christ at the center of its activities. He also warned that those who work at the center of the Church may think they are immune to the need to examine their own attitudes and practices. As the Pope delivered his annual Curia address, he acknowledged the ongoing war against Ukraine, as well as other violent conflicts in the world, saying that if peace is desired, it must begin with personal commitments to forgiveness and mercy, and a rejection of bitterness, backbiting, and resentment. If we truly want the din of war to cease and give way to peace, then each of us ought to begin with himself or herself, said Francis. St. Paul clearly tells us that kindliness, mercy, and forgiveness are our medicine for building peace. Were that the case, the Gospel and the Bible as a whole would not have told us of limitations and shortcomings of many of those whom today we acknowledge as saints, he said. Through what Pope Francis said, we can see that Pope Francis warns Vatican officials against believing Church no longer needs conversion. Francis cautions against heresy of creating a pure church only for the pure. He wanted to create a community of God's children following his teachings, not refusing to change and improve. Pope does not mention whether these opposing forces are the Antichrist or not, but we should also have a comprehensive view to prevent every situation from happening, and we will know how to avoid it. Pope Francis has seen the future and the support for same-sex couples. Since Pope Francis declared that the Church would henceforth bless same-sex couples, there have been gales of backlash. This is understandable. The Catholic Church enjoys an extensive recognition as the global symbol of organized religion. Hence, there is an unspoken concern that the papal embrace of the LGBTQ community would change the balance of emotions on the touchy subject. This fear of the unknown has helped recruit many into the hate camp against the pontiff, with some calling him out as the Antichrist. But you need to focus on this point. The Pope is accused of being satanic because he is determined to show love to fellow humans. Why do we always talk about love, but we reject and distance ourselves from our friends just because they love someone similar to them? It is even worse for those of us who claim to practice Christianity. Day in, day out, we listen to and memorize the Sermon on the Mount, while we never allow the spirit of the teachings to find a way into our stony hearts. For how on earth could someone, after digesting the parable of the Good Samaritan, fail to juxtapose it with today's detestation of same-sex couples? I am convinced that sometime in the future, we shall look back at the folly of discriminating against gay citizens. If you looked at it carefully, it is easier to forgive a love-struck queer than someone you thought was a conduit for demonic manifestation. Another example of how our society is given to change is in the history of Christianity itself. There was a time Christian Jews refused to welcome non-Jews into their fold. Apostles Paul and Peter quarreled over this. It took God's direct intervention through a personal supernatural encounter for Peter to accept that Gentiles, which means non-Jews, could be co-tenants in God's mansion. The concept of a Gentile knowing God was too strange for even the most liberal follower of Christ at that time. But look at where we are today. The cynic's next argument is that the Bible directly preaches against sex between same gender, which is told in these Bible verses. The Word of God expressly termed these practices as sin. They also support this position by asserting that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because of this. These arguments are valid, but in order not to miss the spirit of the book, we must put it in context. The entire Bible is a story of contact. The human created by God is seeking to connect with his Creator, and God at the end of the age reveals himself to the human. This Creator would then take over the government of the earth and make everything beautiful. But before that day comes, we are not able to fully understand his ways. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Here Pope Francis the Bible is talking about that final day we shall see God as he truly is, in living color. Between now and then, our visions are foggy, for we see in part and we know in part. So, considering that we do not truly know God's standards, our most dependable ally in this earthly sojourn is love. Even faith and hope trail behind. It was love that made the Samaritan ignore the biases of his day, and finally secure a place for himself in the records of God. It was love that made Peter accept Paul's hard teachings about accepting Gentiles, which fortified his place in the good books of the Gentile church. Is it not an irony that today, even we the Gentiles cannot find a space for the gay sinners among us? And Pope Francis openly supports them. It doesn't mean he is anti-Christ, but it is those who behave cruelly towards their fellow human beings who need to be condemned. In fact, sometimes the Antichrist is not a very noble figure, but the people themselves who have hearts full of hatred. And it is this hatred that will cause them to deny God, turn their backs on him, and officially betray him. Wonder if this is any different from the Antichrist? Against duplicity of heart. Pope Francis has warned against living a double life, highlighting the dangers it presents for authentic Christian witness and its potential to create a crisis of credibility for the Church. The warning stemmed from the Gospel reading in which Jesus warned against following the examples of the scribes and the Pharisees. Quoting St. Matthew's Gospel, the Pope told the crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square, Jesus uses very severe words, for they preach but do not practice. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. Like the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the people, the Pope warned that this incoherence presented a problem not only for those who served the Church, but anyone who was called to a role of responsibility. This rule is always valid for a priest, a pastoral worker, a politician, a teacher, or a parent. What you say, what you preach to others, be committed to living it first yourself, the Pope said. Using these words as a point of departure, the Pope focused on this double aspect of the distance between saying and doing and the primacy of the exterior over the interior. The Pope warned that in the chasm between words and external actions, there was the duplicity of heart that puts at risk the authenticity of our witness and our credibility as persons and as Christians. While acknowledging that because of the inherent fragility of the human condition, we experience a certain distance between what we say and what we do, the Pope went on to warn that having a duplicitous heart is something else instead. The Pope said this presented a grave risk both for internal spiritual life and as an outward expression of living as a Christian, jeopardizing the life of Christians and the Church's credibility. Expounding the second component of the Gospel's message, the Pope said, the scribes and Pharisees were concerned about having to hide their inconsistency to save their outward reputation. According to the teachings of Pope Francis, inside each of us, there always exists a side that can be easily shaken. Indeed, when a charming person appears and says that he is God, if your soul is weak, you will certainly be shaken. Pray to God, asking for steadfastness so that you are strong and steadfast enough to face the challenges when the Antichrist appears. Listen to the voice of creation. Pope Francis urges in his message for the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. If we learn how to listen, we can hear in the voice of creation a kind of dissonance. On the one hand, we can hear a sweet song in praise of our beloved Creator. On the other, an anguished plea, lamenting our mistreatment of this our common home. Praise be to you, my Lord, for all your creatures. Mindful of the exhortation of St. Paul, to rejoice with those who rejoice and to weep with those who weep, let us weep with the anguished plea of creation. Pope Francis concludes, let us hear that plea and respond to it with deeds, so that we and future generations can continue to rejoice in creation's sweet song of life and hope. God is the one and only Creator, and only He has the right to decide everything that happens. So, when someone says that they represent God in deciding your fate and life, immediately stay away because that person is a liar. This person will be very charming, he is smart, rich, and has the ability to speak attractively. He will drag you along with his words. But be alert. Pope Francis said, there is only one God. Climate change will destroy humans. Antichrist will most likely appear not in human form. So, what is it? When the issue of climate change emerged in our society, some Christians gloated and rejoiced, saying that Almighty God was ostensibly hastening his judgment of earth, as prophesied in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. One said, there is nothing you can do about climate change. The judgment of God has come. It is against this backdrop that one would appreciate Pope Francis, who did not toe the apocalyptic stance in respect to climate change and contemporary environmental exigencies. As a green pope, he is revolutionary. He loves the people of Earth, and he loves God's creation. He was not shy in professing his thoughts on climate change. In 2015, he penned a 184-page encyclical declaring, "Climate change is a global problem with grave implications. It represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day." Interestingly, Francis's 2015 encyclical came just before United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference in Paris, the very COP21, where the historic Paris Climate Accord was negotiated. Then, in agreement, the United Nations Environment Program boss Achim Steiner affirmed, "Science and religion are aligned on this matter. The time to act is now." The Pope contends against the injustice of the increased challenges that poorer countries face as a result of the climate crisis, emphasizing the ecological debt and corresponding responsibilities of affluent countries and organizations that have devastated the environment. Truly, just as the Pope's encyclical underscores the moral imperative for urgent action on climate change to lift the planet's most vulnerable populations, protect development, and spur responsible growth, his recent show of love to the gay community highlights the urgent need to heal our deep-seated wounds as a human civilization. In his day, Jesus Christ utilized the Samaritan gambit to break new grounds in his earthly mission, pushing his Father's love into new territories, psychologically and geographically. I dare say, Pope Francis prepares us for our collective future, where climate justice and green development define our socio-economic survival, while inclusion, forgiveness, and social harmony dictate our subconscious journey towards world peace. The arrival of the Antichrist. The Bible teaches us that at some point in the future, an evil ruler called the Antichrist is going to step onto the platform of the world stage and take the leading role for a short time in the affairs of mankind. Many predecessors of the Antichrist have already come and gone. Paul tells us about the supernatural appearance of the Antichrist when he writes about the last days in 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4. Paul writes, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." Paul says that before the Antichrist can be revealed, first there must be a falling away that takes place in the world. The phrase falling away is taken from the Greek word apostasia, which describes a falling away or a revolt. Before the Antichrist can be welcomed with wide open arms by the world, a change in society's mentality must first take place. Paul uses this word to predict a rebellion or mutiny against God that will occur in the last days. The text does not imply that this mutiny will occur within the church. Rather, it seems to point to a change in society's attitude toward God. Paul is describing a time when society's attitude toward God and holy things will become mutinous. Once this anti-God and anti-godliness mentality pervades society, the world will be primed and prepared to receive this man, whom Paul calls that man of sin. In 2 Thessalonians 2:9, Paul warns that the Antichrist will even employ supernatural signs and wonders to try to prove that he is God. He says, "Even him, whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders." Any Christian who is sensitive to the Spirit of God is keenly aware that we are living in a time when society's attitude toward God is radically changing. The world is being primed and prepared to throw open its arms and receive this world ruler who will oppose God and bring rot, ruin, and destruction to mankind. Unfortunately, the lost world doesn't realize that it is being slowly seduced and trained for this moment the devil has long awaited. As believers, we have no need to be afraid, for none of this will affect those who know Jesus Christ. However, it will affect those who are lost and without God. they will fall under the supernatural hypnotism of this devil-anointed leader. And if they don't come to know Jesus Christ before all of this occurs, they will be ensnared in the trap that the entire world is about to fall into in the days to come. Please realize what a critical time you are living in right now. Jesus is coming quickly. Those who know him will escape many of these trials and temptations, but those who don't know him will be caught in the delusion and devastation.